Hey everybody, this is Marina, your podcast host at UNBOSSED. Here we go. At UNBOSSED, I interview amazing women in Chicago. There is so much woman power in this city that I want to provide these women a platform to tell their story. Please connect with us and please consider supporting by sharing, liking, commenting the podcast. Tell all your Netflix friends and family about it. Submit a recommendation for a guest, subscribe on your favorite podcast app, and donate by clicking on the anchor link and help me continue to make great episodes. I hope you enjoy and welcome to the show. Ellie Bahrmasel is co-founder and CEO at Further Faster Design. A serial strategist with a creative core, Ellie has spent her career growing and transforming organizations, programs, and products through design. Her diversity of experience, from government to Fortune 100s to venture-backed startup, has given her insight that fuel her ability to have teams maneuver around and through their biggest growth challenges. She's talented, funny, and I'm super excited to have her on the podcast. Welcome, Ellie. Hi, this is Marina, your podcast host at UNBOSSED. I have the pleasure to talk to Ellie Bahrmasel today. She is co-founder and CEO of Further Faster Design. Welcome, Ellie.
Thank you, Marina. So excited to be here with you.
Nice to meet you. And don't worry about muting yourself. We're gonna have a great conversation here. Google Hangouts is never the best option for this type of things, but we're gonna work it out.
That's the name of the game as women and as entrepreneurs. We just make it work.
That's right. You were telling me just a cool story about your name just now, and just giving us some context about who you are before we dive deep into your professional career. You were just telling me that Bahrmasel actually came from where?
So I'm half Filipino, half Jewish. My dad's family is Jewish, and they immigrated to the U.S. in the early 1900s and came through Ellis Island. And the way the name had been spelled and pronounced initially when they came here was Bahrmasel, Barmazel. And for any Hebrew speakers who might be listening, they might be having a light bulb moment. It is Hebrew for one who has luck. Mm-hmm. And it's not a really standard last name in the Jewish community or anywhere. And so when they came through Ellis Island, the customs officials changed it to its current spelling, and everyone pronounced it as Bahrmasel since the the Z became an S. So I'll answer to any variation thereof, but yeah, it's gone its own pivots and transformations.
Nice, beautiful. And tell us a story about Ellie as a little girl. Where did you grow up, and what were you doing? Was your family influence for you?
Yeah, I always joke that I was always on this pathway to being an entrepreneur. I just didn't know it at the time. But my mom came to the U.S. from the Philippines a couple of years before she met my dad in 1979. She's one of 10 siblings, and she is a nurse and has spent her entire life caring for other humans, both professionally and just as who she is in the world. So she always has moved through the world with this deep sense of empathy and care and concern for the people around her, which is something I internalized very early on by being her daughter and having the honor of learning alongside her. And my father actually struggled with mental health the majority of his adult life, with agoraphobia, which is fear of the outside, fear of leaving the house, which I think maybe many people can relate to in a new way after the pandemic, from which we are hopefully starting to emerge. But what that meant for him is he ran his business from home in a pre-internet era, right? Like he had a fax machine next to the dining room table and notepads and a typewriter and the actual landline
Right.
phone next to him. The dining room was kind of his command center. And my mom, being a nurse, worked outside of the house. So I always had a literal seat at the table with my dad. His business associates would come to our house since he wouldn't leave the house. And I would sit with this group of men around the table, and they would, let me color on their documents and play tic-tac-toe with me. And I always had this innate curiosity about everything. When people would ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would say I was going to be a ballerina, a teacher, a firefighter, a business owner, a doctor, and a waitress. And people would always be like, well, which one are you going to do first? And I'd always say, no, I'm going to do all of them at the same time. And I think those little vignettes give you a sense of how I landed where I landed today.
That is such a cool story, and also how resourceful of your father to not get crippled by his condition. Is it appropriate to call that a condition?
Yeah. Okay.
And for you to see him even like working through that and making the world revolve and still making the world work around his needs and what he needed to feel good.
I love the way you just framed that, Marina. I don't think I had ever thought about it in those exact terms, but it's true. Like, there were many things he didn't get to accomplish in his life because of his mental health condition, and yet what he was able to achieve and the way that he pivoted, right, and found ways to still build and translate his ideas into a reality with his world being as small as it was, right? Like, think about being in a pre-internet era. You had the landline, you had a phone book, you had a fax machine, and that was it. And he had a very expansive world in spite of it. He had a business where he essentially helped broker car dealerships, people who had licenses for them, people who wanted to start them, the manufacturer, bring it all together. And he, for anyone who's listening who grew up in Chicago, you might remember there was a Scottie Pippen Dodge on Western Avenue, and it was like a big thing that Scottie Pippen had a car dealership, and my dad was the person who had brought it together and brought that deal together. And it was really cool that he was able to accomplish all of that without ever leaving the house.
I know. That is so, he's like a modern, without knowing it, it's like COVID modern man.
Yeah. It's actually been a great source of strength for me over the past year and a half. I'm an extrovert. I like to live on airplanes, and I like to, have coffees in person with people. And I was really worried about what the pandemic was going to do in terms of that connectivity and being able to accomplish things as an entrepreneur. And when it got hard, I thought about what my dad was able to do without the internet. If he had Zoom, who knows what he would have been able to do. So it was a source of strength.
That's awesome. And so then you went to school. I don't know what did you study in school, but how did you end up, if you can give me like a brief run through your history, not to diminish it, but just to provide some color to your professional life. What did you go to school for, and how did you start? How were your early days of being a professional?
Oh my gosh. It, like many things in life, right? Not at all linear, and we try and put it into some type of linear story so we can make sense of it all. I was always working from a very early age. I took inspiration from the Babysitters Club and started a Babysitters Club with some friends. I was a camp counselor. My stepdad helped me get a work permit so I could scoop ice cream before I was legally old enough to work at Baskin Robbins 31 flavors. And my father, my biological father, who I was talking about, passed away when I was 13. And my mom went to college in the Philippines. So, and my stepfather never finished his 4-year degree. So I didn't really have anyone helping me figure out what I was doing in my higher education. And I certainly didn't know. And the schools that I went to, didn't have the support infrastructure to help people like me figure out what they were doing with their lives.
What is people like you?
Um, I had very high test scores and not so stellar GPAs because the nuns at my Catholic school and I had very differing opinions about how one should spend their time, right? Like I would pass all of my tests and quizzes with A's and B's, and I wouldn't do the homework because I felt like the purpose of homework was to learn. And if I already learned it, why would I waste my time learning something I already know?
I really liked you. I was like the same exact way in high school.
See, the people like us know each other.
Wait, why do I have to do this again? Nah, that doesn't sound right.
Exactly, right? Like education, the education system as it exists wasn't necessarily set up for people like you and I who maybe were just a little bit bored by our classes. And I had phenomenal teachers. I don't want to indicate that they weren't incredible. They were incredible, but the system just wasn't set up for me. And I was always told, like, you'll figure it out. And it's like, oh, what does that mean? You know, I had gone through a traumatic loss with losing my dad right before high school started, and had parents who didn't understand the US college system. And then the people who were supposed to help me navigate this were like, you're smart, you'll figure it out. So I've since then, as a professional, been really passionate about first generation college students and helping them. Not that college is the end all be all. There are so many different ways to build an incredible life. But I stumbled through it, went to a couple of different universities. At one point, I thought I would be a teacher because I really enjoyed my camp counselor job. And then thankfully realized that, teaching kids to play duck, duck, goose is very different than teaching them the Pythagorean theorem. And found my way into the world of marketing and found myself in the early stages of my career working in recruitment and executive placement. Serendipitously. It wasn't something I was seeking. I didn't really know. I was kind of afloat and adrift in the world, not certain what I wanted to do. I think 6-year-old me who had all of those plans for all of those jobs was probably very disappointed in 23-year-old me not being able to pick a thing to go do. But I was working in executive placement, largely in the financial services industry. The market went boom. And there was no longer a need for executive placement for financial services companies. And that was, in some regards, right? Like you can only connect the dots looking backwards. But that was a gift for me because I would have continued
doing that.
Sitting in, really unhappily too, right? Like really unhappily. And so I tried to figure out what was next, did a few different little marketing projects for small brick and mortar businesses that were, this is early days of Twitter, and they're trying to figure out how do we use Twitter as a business. So helping them, set up their Twitter accounts and have conversations with humans using Twitter. But ultimately, I have always had a passion for service. In 7th grade, I was our school secretary for student council. And I still remember the secretary of our school was like, you would be an incredible politician, which, both an insult and a compliment, I think. But I've always had this passion for service and civics and, how do we make the world more just and equitable? And so when Rahm Emanuel was leaving the White House and he had his big farewell with the president in the Rose Garden, I Googled the person who was quoted as his publicist in the Tribune article, sent a blind email on a Saturday night that was just basically like, if he's doing an exploratory, here's my skill set. I'd love to volunteer. That was a Saturday night. By Wednesday, I had a full-time job on Rahm's campaign. And worked on the campaign, transitioned into the administration, spent a few years in the administration, really helping that team create new ways of operating. And, after 22 years, it was like being in a startup. And through that experience, and then my subsequent role working at a Fortune 100 on the digital divide, I realized that something that was missing for me in all of my roles was this idea of where's the voice of the people that we're trying to make change for, right? Like we make decisions based on data. And data is wonderful, but data without context doesn't tell us much. We can make it tell us whatever we want, but we don't understand what the lived experience of the day-to-day is of the person who we're trying to make the change for. What I realized then was what we were talking about was human-centered design. And it was so relieving to finally have a language for what I had always innately believed to be true, that every human has agency, and that agency should be honored and centered when we are making decisions. So that brought me to this current pathway around how we build great startups, programs, policies in the world of entrepreneurship centered around the people for whom we're trying to create that change with our products.
That's a very awesome stories, and there's a couple of things that you mentioned here. I think the first one is you talked about the digital divide, and you worked a little bit on that. Can you tell us what is the digital divide?
I wish I didn't have to tell you what the digital divide was, but here it is, it still exists. So from a very high level, the digital divide is who does or doesn't have access to the internet through high quality internet infrastructure and high quality devices. And we see this play out in a number of different ways, right? But one of the things that I found most illuminating when I was doing this work was students who were trying to complete homework assignments on a mobile device, or who didn't have connectivity for, like, their data plans didn't have enough internet, even if they were trying to complete it on their phones. So they would go to a McDonald's on their phones, not even with a laptop, trying to complete full homework assignments.
And we're talking about here in the city of Chicago.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, that sounds like
young kids, probably.
Yeah, both young kids and also adults who are trying to, you know, it really spans the gamut around age, but the socioeconomic divide around connectivity is really real. And as more and more job opportunities are accessible only online, or as more and more government resources and documents are only available online, there's a growing disparity, right? And I believe that digital access is a civil rights issue, because more and more people will be excluded from being full participants in all that society has to offer if it's only available through this medium that people can't access.
Beautiful. Absolutely. And so I know you're probably a little bit disconnected from that nowadays, or maybe not, but you can tell me if you are. Do you know if the city has done, or if there has been any progress made on this metric? And first of all, do you remember how big the divide is, or was? And do you know if there's something that has been done, just personally, if you've been following it?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, admittedly, I haven't followed really closely where the city has made progress. I know that, you know, this is controversial, but we know that Amazon was turning on free Wi-Fi through everyone's home devices, like Alexa, right? And those are solutions that can solve, at least for part of the connectivity issue, if there's access to free Wi-Fi everywhere. Though in many other countries, we look at internet access as a infrastructure challenge to be solved by the government, not through the private sector. But that's a different conversation for a different day. As for what progress the city has made, I'm not 100% certain. There had been some explorations around, like, what free Wi-Fi, like free citywide Wi-Fi would look like. But
yeah. And in terms of equipment as well, I'm sure there are a gamut of discrepancies there across socioeconomic statuses and things like that, and that influences the divide that you noticed at that time.
Absolutely, right? Like, if you think about any function that you're trying to do on a mobile device, like word processing, right? Like, if you've got to write a 30-page paper, you might be able to take notes and get a fair amount accomplished on your mobile device, but the amount of detail that you need to focus on when writing, like, for example, a lengthy essay, right? Like the editing, the revision process is just a little bit more cumbersome
Yeah.
on the on a mobile device than on a laptop or desktop. And and this is why I never talk about connectivity without talking about devices, because even if you have the device, the lack of connectivity can still be a hindrance, right? Like if you can't access, and we saw this in full force during the pandemic. There are so many stories throughout the state of Illinois of parents who would drive to a McDonald's parking lot or a library parking lot with their laptops to be able to download assignments for their kids because they didn't have the access at home, even if they had the device. So, it's two sides of the same coin, and we need to be thinking about both the infrastructure for connectivity and the access to devices that individuals have.
Absolutely. And now I'm going to plug a little bit of your skill here. And how would you re-engineer this using human-centric device? And give us a definition of that, if you will. And it doesn't have to be in detail, but like give us a concept of an example of what would it be different if we used human-centric design on an issue like this.
I love that question, Marina, and I'm going to try and prevent myself from really nerding out and taking us down a rabbit hole. But at its core, human-centered design is a series of processes that we go through to bring the human experiencing the problem into the process of designing the solution. Right? So I don't really understand what it's like to live without access and connectivity as an adult. I lived through that as a child. Remember late nights at Kinko's, when it was still called Kinko's before being acquired by FedEx, where because of lack of connectivity, my mom would have to put on a credit card, because we didn't have cash. She would put time on a computer and a printer on a credit card so I could finish my science fair projects. It's families like that who are experiencing the problem acutely, who don't get to be at the table as we're designing solutions. So the process entails bringing the person experiencing the problem, and sometimes it's multiple stakeholders who've got different ways of experiencing the pain point in a real tangible way. There might be personas, so to speak. So in this context, it might be the student who is in 8th grade trying to fill out high school applications, or the rising senior who's trying to fill out the Common App for college. It might be the parent who's experiencing job insecurity that's trying to apply for a more stable job or supplementary income or benefits that are available to them through state and federal government. And bringing them into the process to first understand, what does the problem look like for you day in, day out? Where are you limited? How do you try and solve the problem, even if it seems illogical, right? Like often we hear people say, well, people aren't trying to solve their problem. I'm the one, right? Like there's a bit of a hero complex that comes in for those of us who are fortunate enough to be building solutions where no one's trying to solve it. They need me to fix it for them. When in reality, it's about understanding, what are the ways, they're often analogs for what the solution at scale could be, or some insight about how we get people to engage and adopt based on the way they're currently trying to solve it. So first, beginning with that place of curiosity and appreciative inquiry, and leaving our judgment at the table and trying to learn about what the problem looks like day in, day out, and the person's attempts to solve it and the challenges that they experience in doing it. And then bringing them into the process as we start to design the solution, to get their input and feedback, to be generative in ideas that we might apply. And then we as solution builders, bringing forward our resources, the knowledge that we have through our own lived experience as innovators or as policymakers or as engineers, bringing that together with the knowledge that can only be acquired through lived experience and harnessing it together for the forces of good. That's a much longer answer than I intended to give. But yeah, it would have been so powerful to have those stakeholders in the conversation throughout.
And so I guess the first question is like, why are they not?
That's a question I ask myself a lot as well. And
I mean, what have you found? I guess I know you don't have the answer, but what have you experienced?
I'm going to try and give the kindest answer I can. And it's been a journey for me to get to the kind answer on this. But often when you think about who's in positions of power, it's not representative of the community who has the problem. And there can be a sense of, first, hubris. Hubris plays a role where if you have attained a certain level of education from a certain type of institution, part of what gets conferred with the degree sometimes is the hubris that
I just saw a post. Let me say. I just saw a post earlier that said, "Don't confuse a degree with intelligence."
Yes. Yes. I'm never going to minimize the role of education. I am a lifelong learner, and I've acquired a lot of my knowledge by experience and by immersing myself in texts and learning opportunities that are relevant to what I'm trying to learn or that are relevant to my lived experience. But just because an Ivy League institution has saw fit to confer a degree upon you, one that you could afford or somehow had financed, does not mean that you are inherently qualified to solve all problems for all people. But it's easy when we get to places of power and privilege to lose sight of that. And it's not intentional, right? More often than not. It's not intentional, but people lack the awareness that they don't know what they don't know. People don't take the time to name their known unknowns. Because if you did, you'd realize a known unknown is, I don't know what the day-to-day is like for a working family of 4 that doesn't have connectivity. Because if you took the time to realize that's a known unknown, well, how do you find the knowledge then? It's not going to be in an academic text. It's not going to be in an academic study. Odds are, maybe I'm wrong about that. But it's by undergoing ethnographic research where we really get to know the person and the lived experience that we acquire the knowledge. But that would require us admitting we don't know something. And I think that there's just something about that, the willingness to admit that despite the letters after my name, sometimes many of them, that I still don't know it all. And I might need someone who maybe didn't finish their high school education
to talk to me about it.
Right. And that I'm going to have to defer to them as the subject matter expert can be, frankly, a mind fuck for some people.
Yes, perfect. Okay, now that we've settled the why not there, there's a few things as a professional that does research that I am conflicted about when I talk about this subject. Well, the first one is, how do I find the people that are mostly affected? So say I have a brand new problem, and I know that I have unknowns, but I don't know what unknowns is. Unknown. There are unknowns that I don't know how to solve, right? How do I find the people that are those that they're not in my awareness, but they could be affected? That's my first part of the question. And then 2, if those people are the type of that are disadvantaged in a socioeconomic way, I feel personally bad about taking their time sometimes to do this without compensation, for example, or without honestly, without compensation. Because at the end of the day, if I'm using their time and I know they're not in a place in which they can just give time freely or where they wish to do so, I feel like I need to create compensation in order to make that worth their time.
Amen. So let's start there and work backward, because I will not take anyone's time if I can't compensate them. I will not ask anyone for their contributions if I can't compensate them. And what compensation means can mean different things to different people. When we work with startups that are trying to acquire knowledge from people who fit their end user profile, we always say, don't engage in research unless you've got a budget, especially if we are talking about a group. And it doesn't have to be, a $20,000 budget, right? But I often tell people that for the purposes of ethnographic research, 6 interviews gets you 70% of the insights, and that's better than flying blind. So I'd rather have 70% vision than 0% vision. And if you can't allocate, 6 $100 honorariums for a total of $600,
yeah,
then let me ask you, do you really care about the people whose problems you're trying to solve? Right?
absolutely.
And I recognize the privilege in that. Entrepreneurship is a game laden with privilege, right? Like the table stakes for even getting started are astronomical, and that's another question of access and equity that we can dive into. But I'm very bullish, especially though when we're talking about organizations that have resources, right? And this is really geared. What I'm about to say isn't for that scrappy, 1 or 2 people who met in undergrad trying to build their startup. But if you're coming from, a company that's raised a Series A or a Series B, or you're inside a large corporation or a large nonprofit, you cannot tell me you do not have $600 or even $6,000 to compensate people who
Yeah.
you are asking to bring their whole selves. It is vulnerable, it is raw, it is intimate. And then to say, I'm going to go make money off of you, but I don't have anything for you here, is fundamentally, in my opinion, out of value alignment. And I'd love to see a world in which we start talking about not just this quid pro quo exchange of money for the one-off interview, but how do we bring people in as true stakeholders? Like, what do co-op models look like? What does equity look like for people who make ongoing contributions to the things that we build? So I think that there's like a little bit of creativity that we could be bringing into the mix here too, as we think about how we honor people's experience and their contributions. And, it feels like a little bit of a stretch because everyone's like, I want to keep my cap tables clean. It's like, yes, that's true. And like, let's be creative about what the future holds. And then, to your earlier point about, well, if I have an awareness that there's a universe of people who aren't really in my universe that I need to engage, I really believe in authentic relationship building as a means of connecting with those individuals. And when I say that, if there's a population whose lived identity you don't share, showing up, right? It's not just let me send the blind email and hope that someone responds, but let's say it's building relationships with organizations and community groups where the people with that lived identity gather, and showing up with curiosity and naming the deficit that you're coming into the conversation with to set up the container for trust, right? Because that's so key. Like, there's inherent distrust of someone who's coming in to mine and extract information and then peace out, right? And there's an inherent power dynamic to say, I have resources, you do not, but I need your knowledge. So how do we flip the container and make it clear that person, that group of people are actually the ones with the power? Right? Like, we've equated power with wealth for so long in this country. And it's like, what if it's actually power is lived experience? Power is empathy. Power is vulnerability. Power is in the resource of our being. And I'm honored to receive your power, and I'm going to compensate you. And I'm coming in at a deficit, regardless of what letters I have after my name. You have knowledge I can't acquire, and I'm so excited to learn from you. I think is so essential to how we do that work.
That is beautifully said. I really like that. And I'm so glad you're doing this work, which takes me to your company and how you started Further Faster Design. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? And but let me just paint the picture here. You told us like you were trying new things. You were started in marketing. You worked for Comcast. You worked for the city of Chicago. Then you became like started co-founding things, became self-employed, and started kind of like dabbling, if I say, I don't know, started dipping your toes into the entrepreneurship space. How did you decide to take that leap for people that are thinking about going from a company, say like Comcast, to be like, okay, I want to start my own business? How was that experience for you?
I love this question. There's a lot of layers to it. And again, I will aim for brevity, but as you're learning, brevity isn't always my strong suit. The headline is that I didn't have a choice. I had, you see, my dog agrees.
I didn't have a choice.
I didn't have a choice. He's like, that's right. You were meant to be an entrepreneur. But ultimately, you know, I had recognized pretty early on in my last corporate role that maybe large institutions weren't the place where I was going to do my highest and best work. And I have a degenerative back condition that can manifest different ways for different people. Like some people can have the exact same MRI imaging that I do of their spine and not experience a single symptom. And other people can be so badly disabled that they can't work and receive Social Security benefits. And it just runs the gamut, and the imaging could look exactly the same. So in my last corporate role, my physical health just got worse and worse and worse, no matter how much physical therapy I was doing. And I went from working out 2 hours a day, you know, a morning workout and an evening workout, doing 100 burpees a day, and really being in the best physical health of my life, to barely being able to walk. Wow. And I had received a couple of epidural injections, and when they didn't help, my doctor, who had treated, you know, world-class athletes, said to me that maybe I needed to take some time off. And that was not how I was hardwired. I was like, what do you mean? We've got too much shit to get done. And he had a very candid conversation with me that maybe it was time to prioritize myself, take a break. And I did. And it was amazing how much better I felt physically. And I had to acknowledge in that moment, I mean, I was far from perfect, and I still wound up having surgery about a year and a half later. But it was really clear to me at that point that my life had to be realigned. Like my body was screaming at that point. And I had to sit with myself, literally, because I was having a hard time walking, but also figuratively, right? And I had to really acknowledge who I have always been is someone who doesn't deal well with no, someone who doesn't deal well with upholding the status quo, and someone who doesn't really enjoy navigating the small p politics of the day-to-day mechanisms of large institutions. And I realized if I was going to be an activist for how things should be built, the path of least resistance was just to go build my own shit or work with people who were building things that I was excited about and bring my skill set to bear.
Nice. Beautiful. That's really good. I identify a lot with what is your birthday?
July 10th.
Oh, wow. Almost here. I was wondering because I'm an Aquarius, and so I find Aquarians are kind of like that too.
We'll have to do a chart review.
You're gonna have to do a chart. Yeah. Okay. No, but I identify a lot with what you said, and sometimes it's funny how life gives you no choice. You just gotta go do it. And so, is that when you started Further Faster?
No, so there's been a couple
of steps, right?
Yeah, there have been a couple steps on this journey. I started consulting, right, because I left this role without a plan, and I typically don't advocate for that, but there really wasn't a whole lot of a choice. And I am fortunate to have a really wonderful partner in my husband, and he and I have been together for almost 13 years at this point. And thank you. It's been, like most good things, hard work, but so worth it. Yeah. And, you know, in our relationship, I'm the risk taker. He's the person who balances me out in that regard. And even he was like, we'll figure it out. You just have to take care of yourself. Go leap. You're not meant to be in these types of places. And so I left without a plan. And it took me a while to figure out, well, what the hell is the plan here, right? The first plan was just get my mobility back, be able to walk again. And I did a number of different consulting projects for various Fortune 500s, looking at innovation in their impact space. Then I was consulting with a number of different startups, both, you know, for-profit startups that were aspiring to venture scale and startups in the impact space. And after the 2016 elections, I partnered with a local female entrepreneur in Chicago to start a civic tech startup with an adjacent pack. And we did that work together for about a year and a half. And I realized that where I wanted to go and where the organization was going were two different places. And I wanted to be really intentional. If I was going to work for myself or be in this crazy entrepreneurship game, then I wanted to be really true to myself. So I was splitting my time after that startup engagement drew to a close. I started splitting my time between Chicago and LA. I was consulting with venture-backed startups in LA.
Nice.
And the last main client that I had on the West Coast was this incredible team who had built a social support platform, like support engagement with social media. And the product was incredible. The founders were incredible humans. They had raised $2.5 million in their seed round. And they had asked me to come in and help them figure out their strategic growth. And I had this moment, Marina, where it hit me very quickly when I said, like, let's review your user personas. Let's review your consumer journey map. Would love to see the backlog on your product roadmap. Tell me a little bit about your, insights and discovery and your traction channels. And none of that existed.
None of it?
None of it. And the product roadmap, I take that back. The product roadmap and feature backlog existed, but this backlog of features wasn't generated by user demand. It was just the dev team being like, here's other shit we'd like to go build.
Here's a cool thing, I think, the product team, something like that, the product owner.
100%. And it was actually a development shop that was an equity holding partner in the work. And I just had a moment of my lightning bolt moment of everyone wants to talk about growth because it's sexy. No one talks about traction. No one cares about traction. Like people do, but it's not sexy. It's not appealing. It's hard work. It's nitty gritty, messy. And I was like, we cannot talk about growth until we back up and do the foundational things we need to do for traction.
And so how do you define traction in that context? Because I want to make sure it's clear for me, also for the audience.
Yeah, so when I think about what traction really means is we have got proof points that we are solving a problem, like a big enough problem, in a way that creates enough user delight that not only are they willing to pay for it, they're willing to continue engaging with the product, right? Like if you log in once, that's not traction. How many times are you, even if you don't have a paid model yet, right? Like how many times did you log into the product? Once? That's not traction.
Yeah, that's growth. Potentially.
Depending on who's, I'm doing these air quotes because, growth is like a good political campaign, right?
Yes.
Like you can spin it however you want to spin it, but when you really look at it, the proof is in what legislation got passed. And the same is true in startups, right? Where it's like, we can talk about, we acquired 5,000 new users month over month for the past 5 months. Great, but how many times did they log in?
How many times did they come back? Yeah.
Yep. What's the length of the average visit? Right? Things like that. And, it was so interesting because so many teams I've talked to have been like, acquisition by any means necessary. And so what? Acquisition isn't when the product is sticky. It doesn't mean that the gears are fully turning. It's just a bunch of bullshit in a spreadsheet where you can say, look at all these email addresses that we've acquired.
Okay. There's a bunch of social media companies that have made millions and billions of dollars on bullshit on a spreadsheet. So
exactly. And it's harmful. It is harmful because
it is hard.
There's like, we could spend a whole hour just diving into why that pisses me off. Because at the end of the day, if that's how we're measuring success, it doesn't mean that we've actually done anything to improve someone's life with the product that we've built. And it doesn't mean that this thing's ever actually going to make money. It means we were really good at throwing up a landing page and getting people to give us their email address. Great. Guess what? That isn't technical. Like in my book, if someone tells me that that's acquisition, I tell them to come back to me when they've thought about it, because that's not acquisition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Like it sounds like that's acquisition, and then it's like, I guess on a very technical level, but if they didn't even really get through one full cycle of using the product, have you really acquired them? Like, let's get really in the weeds here, the difference between acquisition and continued use.
Perfect. And so traction is about really like identifying the users and identify the problem, making sure you have a market fit almost, right? Is that what it is?
And I'd even take it a step further. Okay. I always talk about, product market fit is a great headline and it's something we should strive for. But I also like to think about the concept of business market fit, where it's like, okay, we've got a product people like, that they're using, that they're willing to pay for. That's the other piece, right? Where it's like, well, what's the revenue model? What's the sustainable revenue model that you can grow with? And sometimes we don't, to your point about companies that have made billions of dollars based on those, on the email acquisitions, great, but they didn't have a plan for how they were going to create sustainable revenue. And who suffers the consequence for that is the user. And I am very adamant that when we are building companies, whether we're talking brick and mortar hair salon or venture scale billion-dollar SaaS company, we are fundamentally asking people to be in relationship with our business and with our product. And there's a certain level of integrity and care that I need to have for you as a human, whether you're coming in for a shampoo and a blowout, or you're logging in to get the financial modeling that my software can provide for you. So, thinking about how I also make sure that I'm still here with my lights on in a way that doesn't make your life miserable is important to consider in these early days too.
I like that. And so is this where a startup would start? For the people that are listening and they're starting their own companies, like, is this the work that you would recommend doing first before even they touch a keyboard, or when?
Oh, that is such a good question. And the part of the joy of Further Faster and why my partners and I started it is it is chaos. Early stage startup is a chaos, and I would never mislead anyone and say that it's not. It is, but we can make it controlled chaos, right? And there are so many examples I have of teams that are like, I had a problem, so I had an idea, and now I'm going to go put $300K into development to build the product. Ooh, hang on. We don't just go from idea to solution in the market, right? And where it's like, I had an idea, now it's developed and I'm getting a bunch of users. There's all of these steps that actually live in between. And, product market fit, we always talk about it, or often talk about it in this linear way. If X, then Y, and ultimately Z. And that is not the case at all. It's actually cyclical, right? Like, and the way that the market moves so quickly, what's true today, where you have fit, could be out the window tomorrow. And I'm not just talking about cataclysmic global events like a pandemic, right? Like, the market just shifts. We acquire knowledge and experience so rapidly, more rapidly than any other time in human history. And our businesses need to be prepared to meet that. So in the earliest days, it's like, how do you get the flywheel of your product market fit engine operating? And it starts with recognizing, like, putting our hubris on the shelf, right? And being like, I am not my end user. Because even if I am the person who experiences the problem, I have a bias towards being right. I have a bias that I'm smart. I have a bias that I know better than someone else. So I always tell early stage teams, and this is part of what we do with the founding teams that we work with, right? Like, start with understanding the problem. just because you're experiencing it doesn't mean that that's what the problem looks like writ large. So both through primary and secondary research, right? Like there's the secondary piece around the market analysis and the competitive analysis and the feature matrices and looking at the startup graveyard and seeing who failed, which is actually a piece people often overlook. I love talking to people who are like, this is greenfield and no one's done it before. I'm like, maybe no one succeeded before, but the odds that you're the only person who's ever had this idea, no matter how smart and wonderful you are,
very low.
Very low. Right, so there's all of that secondary research, but there's also the primary research that I referenced when we were talking about digital divide. Is what does this problem look like for someone who wasn't me and who also isn't my college roommate and who also isn't my mother, right? Because there's a little bit of that. If I, Marina, now you and I are friends, and if I call you, and not even with my idea, right? Because that's the other piece. People are like, I told Marina my idea. I told my friend Sally and my friend Bob my idea. They all loved it. At the end of the day, are we going to have wine or coffee together? Well, just like you wouldn't tell me that a dress makes my ass look fat, right? Like you probably aren't going to tell me that my baby is ugly, and my baby is my business. So before we even ask people whether or not they like our solution, let's understand the problem. Yeah. And with curiosity, not trying to lead people to tell me what I want to hear, to validate that I want to go, that I should go build this thing. But I always set out to prove myself that I am wrong. Like I want someone to invalidate my belief about the problem. So I don't waste years of my life building something no one wants.
Absolutely.
And so how do we start there? Let's understand the problem, both through the lens of the market and through the lens of the person who we think holds the problem. Then let's validate that the problem is actually big enough to build a business around. I could have a very super specific problem around, what's the availability of pupusas after 10 p.m. in this 3-block radius of Albany Park. Okay, well, the people who experience that specific problem are me and about like 5,000 other people in my 3-block radius of Albany Park in Chicago. It's pretty small to build a venture scale business around. So evaluating that the problem is big enough to build a business around, and then starting to ideate around solution. And not just the one that I came up with in the shower, but like, what did I hear from people when I went out to understand the problem? Did they give me any seeds or threads that I can keep pulling on that might be different from my initial idea? And then how do I quickly test that, right? Like I think people hear, oh, we've got to go test it. So, okay, I'm going to put together 20 different no-code tools, or maybe I'll spend 50K instead of 300K and develop out an MVP. And it's like, how about none of that? And look, it's silly, but I keep on my desk sometimes, like I will show people sketches, like physical sketches, and I'm a terrible illustrator, but it conveys the point, right? Or in the age that we live in, you can have zero skill and still mock up some type of visual representation using something like Canva or Figma to put something in front of someone before you ever call a dev shop to test whether or not you're heading in the right direction, right? Like that's where we should all be. Anything else after that, like the revenue modeling, our hypothesis around how it generates money, where the traction channels are,
it writes itself.
Yeah, exactly. That'll all come after you do these first pieces. Or like, I love when people are like, I had an idea, so I hired a branding agency. I'm like, what are you branding? You don't even know what the thing is.
That's pretty good. And so is this what Venture Studio is?
Yeah, so our venture studio means a lot of different things to different people, but at the end of the day, it's how do we build really great businesses that are positioning themselves for venture scale? And what's the process and methodology that we use? And our team always says, in the way that, doctors practice medicine or lawyers practice law, our team practices entrepreneurship and venture. So we work cycle over cycle over cycle with early stage startups with, here's the methodology. I can't tell you what's going to happen on the other side of it. Like, I can't guarantee what the solution is going to be. I can't guarantee that the market even wants your product, but what I can guarantee is clarity. Either clarity about what we're going to build, clarity about how we pivot, clarity about what else we need to research, or clarity that this is just a bad idea. Please stop wasting your time.
Beautiful. And so how do you provide this with further faster designs to startups? Like, how does that work if somebody was like wanting to do this and engage your team?
So we serve almost as co-founders in residence. Founding teams are usually coming to us already capitalized. Either they've had previous success in some space and have decided, I'm going to allocate X number of resources to see if I can turn this idea or this problem I want to solve into a startup. Or they've raised a friends and family round, have a little bit of seed funding from somewhere. So they'll hire our team to work with them over the course of 3 to 6 months. We believe in following our own process. So when we started this venture, we talked to 50 early stage founders to understand what their challenges have been in creating their businesses. And what we universally heard was translating the theory into practice is the place where people need support. You can read all the books, you can watch all the TED Talks. Okay, but what does that look like in the day-to-day? And that's where we come in. And we'll work with the teams in the way that we've built out 3 to 6 months worth of work. It's programmatic like in structure that highlights all the different interdependencies of early stage venture creation. Is it still a mess? Yes. Is it a controlled mess? Absolutely. And so that's the way that founders have been finding us and how we've been working together. And we've recently started working with family offices and VCs that have historically made later stage investments, Series A or later, but who really want to find a way to make a meaningful contribution to the pre-seed and seed stage ecosystem. And so ultimately what our work does is de-risk their investment,
Yes.
right? Because now the founder, if you're writing an average size, if your average check size is 500K, and historically a pre-seed or seed stage founding team would take that and go spend at least half of it on going to code with an unvalidated
Idea.
product.
Yeah.
What we're saying is,
let's
actually de-risk that. Let's do the foundational work, right? And it's so much more than research. It's the foundations of your home, right? Like if you don't have a solid foundation, the structure sinks. Even if outside it looks very beautiful.
Yeah, whether you build it now or later, you're going to have to build it.
Exactly. And it costs a lot
more to do it later because you have to tear down the house to redo the foundation.
Bingo. And so it's been really fun to work with our investment partners as well and build venture studios for them and the portfolio that they're building and help them manage their portfolio and really make sure that we're taking a new line of thinking. And, when we talked about access earlier, I'm really passionate too about making sure that we're doing this work with the new majority founders, women, people of color, people of different gender expressions and sexual orientations who have historically been left out of the conversation because they often don't have the freedom to fail in the way cis hetero white male founders do. And we kind of create the container where we say, here's the place where you can learn and fail quickly and with guidance and with structure so that we can then get you out in the market getting traction.
And cheaply, hopefully. Right.
Cheaper, right? Cheaper. Yeah.
Cheaper. Yes. Awesome. I'm gonna let you tell the audience right now where can they find Further Faster Design and how they can contact you.
So we're pretty easy to find and we love new friends. You can find us at furtherfaster.design. I'm also on LinkedIn all the time. And I love new friends. So I'm always happy to hear from new friends on LinkedIn. And also people can just reach out directly via email at Ellie, ELLIE at furtherfaster.design.
Perfect. Thank you. I have a couple more questions for you. For those people that cannot afford an agency like yours, and I have no idea how much it costs, I'm just saying, like, I have nothing, right? Like, I'm a person that does not have many resources. I work 2 jobs, but I have this thing that I want to validate because I don't want to spend my earned hard money on something that is not going to go anywhere. Do you have quick start, cheap, free resource that they can at least start with that we can direct them to?
That's a great question, and we're in the process of developing something. And I reserve a block of time on 2 Friday mornings per month, exactly for those reasons, because I don't want to say that just because a founder doesn't have access to work with our team and invest in our work, doesn't mean I should withhold my knowledge from them. So I allocate 2 Friday mornings per month, at least, to do a little advisory work with founders that want the support and can't afford it. And hopefully that helps at least guide them into the right directions.
Nice. And how do they book time with you on those Fridays?
Just send me an email and I'll send them the Calendly link. Calendly is my best friend.
Perfect. The other questions I had was, it just escaped me. It was so good too. All right, I'm gonna drop it. It must have not been important.
If it comes back around, you know where to find me.
Absolutely. All right, let's do our outros. Actually, this is the thing that I wanted to ask. What is a misconception about whether it's human design or the foundational process that needs to happen in order to start a company that people have most said to you? Like, what is the biggest misconception?
I feel like I have a box of favorites, but I'm going to pull out
the one. Yeah,
I'm going to tell you the most problematic one.
Okay.
I have talked to countless founders who say, I don't have time to do the foundations. I don't have time to do the customer discovery. I don't have time to validate wireframes with my users. And to me, that is the biggest misconception that you could be holding right now. Because if you don't find the time now, you're going to have to find twice as much time and money
later,
6 months from now or a year from now, when you realize you've got something in the marketplace that no one's using. And what is so interesting to me, the way I explain it to people all the time is it's like a slingshot, right? Like, yes, it can feel like a step backwards, right? If you think of your startup as the rock, and it can feel like a step backward, like, why am I going backward? But that tension, I call it the beautiful tension, because everything that you are learning as you sit in the discomfort of being like, why am I talking to people about something that isn't, like, why aren't we just building? Why aren't we going to code? The learning that you are acquiring not only accelerates the velocity once you let go, but it helps point it in the right direction. Versus if you just put the rock in the slingshot and don't ever pull it back, it drops straight down. Kind of like your odds of success long term.
Oh, that's so funny. That's pretty good. I love that imagery. That's perfect. That's perfect. What is a book you've gifted the most that you want to recommend for the audience?
Okay, so I am going to give some love to my friend Peter Bensinger. Peter is the person who introduced me to this book. As you know, Marina, and as anyone who ever visits my LinkedIn knows, books are one of my love languages. And Peter is one of the friends in my life who speaks a similar love language of, let me send you a book. And he sent me this book. I've now sent it to, as of today, 22 people. Nice. It is Adam Grant's latest book, Think Again.
Think Again.
And it really encourages us to do exactly that, think again, and understand the value in being wrong, the value in seeking out the contrarian, the value in iterating on our thinking and iterating rapidly and thinking about what's good and healthy conflict that leads to innovation. I think everyone should read it. Anyone who works on a team, anyone who's thinking about entrepreneurship, anyone who's thinking about how they can be a more effective leader and collaborator within a large institution. I mean, it's just got utility for everyone. And it's a fun, quick read. It's not at all daunting. So
nice. What is a book you would write?
That's a good question. I'd almost want to know what's the book you'd want me to write.
What I would like to try, I can see you writing something about human-centered design, but like the non-traditional way.
I love that. I feel like I've got many books inside me. I don't know if any of them will ever come out. I've thought about that as a topic, and I've also thought about the pathway to building in integrity. Human-centered design is a piece of that, and there's other elements of entrepreneurship that go beyond just tactically what we're doing in the process. And I've been exploring a lot this idea of what I've been calling the whole entrepreneur. And it's not just about how good of a product you can build or your P&L, but like, who do we want to be in the world? And as entrepreneurs, we're building the future today. Like what we create today influences the zeitgeist. It shapes the future. Whether you're talking about a lifestyle brand or something in cybersecurity, we're actively creating the future. Who do we want to be in that? Yeah, maybe I'll write about that someday too.
I like that. That was way better than my idea. I like that.
No, I loved your idea.
And I think the last thing I would want to ask you is, I am sure you don't regret anything and any mistakes and anything like that. But if you had to give yourself advice, looking back at yourself when you were in the midst of things and knowing where you got now, what would that be?
I have plenty of regrets.
You do?
I do, because I think, hindsight is a gift. I wouldn't change anything about where I am today. And I'm grateful for every lesson I've had to learn, painful though it may have been. But I wouldn't say that I don't have regrets. That means that was my invitation to learn. And I give myself some grace in knowing that I did the best that I could with what I knew in the moment. But I would tell myself, have the courage to leave earlier. Have the courage to make the bold moves earlier. Right? Like I think I've had various points in my life known that I was ready to take the next leap, or I was ready to go out on my own, or I was ready to say the thing that no one else was willing to say. And I let my inner critic win that battle. And my inner critic has a role to play. It's good to find some healthy criticisms of oneself, but also learning when to just tell it to shut the hell up and get in the back seat.
That is beautiful. And that is, I think, a perfect conclusion to our podcast today. Thank you so much. I know we went a little bit over time. Thank you for staying. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for being an awesome woman. Thank you for having an awesome company and building things with integrity like I know you are.
Thank you so much for creating this space for brave, honest, and fun conversations, Marina. It's such an honor to be one of your guests and to be part of this ecosystem of just badass humans that you have built through this podcast. So thank you for the invitation.
Of course. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Woo! There you have it. I hope you liked this episode, and please don't forget to share, like, comment on the podcast link. Tell all your networks and friends and family about it. Submit a recommendation for a guest at www.unbossed.io. Subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Donate by clicking on the anchor link and help me continue to make great episodes. You can find all this information on www.unbossed.io. See you next time. Oh, that was good.